next session, of course, is Eyes on Export. So let's set the scene.
Nature plays a really critical role in all industries, but directly, specifically, in the production of food and fibre.
Farmers are really connected to their land, so they're passionate about it. I haven't met a farmer who doesn't want to leave their farm in as good or a better state than what they received it in.
But at the end of the day, our farmers punch above their weight. For every Australian we feed another 450 people overseas.
What we're seeing at the moment is a lot more regulatory focus on trying to hold industries to account around the impact they have, the use they have, and the restoration they give back to nature.
The beef industry, for example, have set targets and have strategies around how, as a sector, they're going to reduce their carbon footprint.
Australia's enjoyed, up until recently, pretty well an unblemished reputation around clean and green. Our food's trusted, we know where it comes from, the world has confidence in our production systems, for example. And our industries have made some big inroads into lifting our game and putting our credentials in those spaces out for everyone to see and verify. So, it's becoming more and more challenging from a worldview perspective, and that's a good thing. We can respond to that. So, that reputation for being a clean, green producer of high quality products, is it in our mind or is it really there? As these new regulatory requirements emerge from different importing countries, this is a binary situation. You have it, you come; you don't have it, you don't. This session we're moving into now will define why demonstrating our sustainability credentials is not only important for consumer confidence, but necessary and required, as Richard alluded to earlier, for new and continued market access. Our consumers are no longer willing to pay more for this sort of stuff. They expect it to come with this stuff. This session is sponsored by the Cool Soil Initiative, which is a flagship enterprise, if I can call it that, involving a whole range of partners, anchored here at Charles Sturt University, but with a national and a global footprint. It supports farmers in exploring their practices to improve the health of their soil, increase yield, and reduce on-farm greenhouse gas emissions. That handshake with profitability, you cannot get past it. The Cool Soil Initiative purpose is to enable a scientifically credible framework for the food industry to support farmers to make a healthier, sustainable future for their and our industry together. It's a pleasure to actually reintroduce Sue McCluskey to the podium, our Special Representative for Australian Agriculture at DAF, who also incidentally runs a beef cattle farm in Yass here in the state. So welcome, Sue.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm particularly pleased to be following Richard, because I think you'll see that in terms of our presentations, there's a lot of consistency, but I'll be focusing very much on what I'm seeing and hearing in global markets, what this means for Australian farmers, and what it means about storytelling, because it's how we actually tell our story in overseas markets that really makes the difference. So first of all, a bit about my role. The Special Representative for Australian Agriculture, it's effectively a trade ambassador. There's only 2 countries in the world that have a role like this, that's Australia and New Zealand, but the New Zealand role is focused more domestically and more on bilaterals. I try not to get involved in bilateral FTA negotiations. That's part of the DFAT portfolio, but certainly when I'm in market, I work closely with DFAT. Importantly, I'm a government appointment, but I'm not a government official. So I'm the bridge between industry and government, which means I can bring back what I'm hearing in overseas markets. I can actually say to Australian governments, both federal and states, these are the things you need to be thinking about, and I can go hard on them from an industry perspective. By the same token, I can give industry messages sometimes that they don't always want to hear, but I have to share what I'm hearing and what I'm learning from overseas. It's the second year of this role. I've been in it almost a bit over 18 months now. Last year, it was very much about building Australia's presence in global markets and trying to get our voice heard. Very quickly this year, it has now moved to us being invited to speak at so many global conferences and summits. I'm heading off to Rome for my third trip to Rome in 3 months next week to speak at the FAO. So we have very quickly got to the stage where we're being heard, and now I am trying to say there are so many more voices. Now that we're being heard, make sure we've got something important to say. In terms of what I bring to the role, I do bring a background in regulation and reg reform, but I also I sit on a number of different boards, a number of agricultural boards, and I also sit on ASX listed boards. So that actually means that I know what it means about the compulsory reporting that will come in next year in terms of ESG. So those contribute to that, and in between I try and run my cattle. So what are we hearing overseas? Clean green, that's something that Australia has been proudly talking about for decades. And it's true, we have a reputation for having really safe and reliable produce. We're known for having a very strong biosecurity regime, but what we don't have is a great reputation for sustainability. And the concern that I am actually seeing when I'm in overseas markets is that if we don't actually keep moving and keep making sure that we are improving what we're doing, we're going to be left behind. Because there's some countries that have actually been looking at us and doing work and improving what they're doing, and particularly in Europe, where because of the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork, it's actually made them think about this, that they're going to overtake us. So we cannot be complacent. So that's really important. If we want to keep maintaining our position in terms of trade and market access, and if we indeed want to grow that, we need to make sure that we can actually demonstrate our claims to sustainability and make sure that that's understood in overseas markets. And of course, we need to make sure that we are meeting the ESG requirements. Something that I actually see we don't do too badly here because we have a very strong regulatory framework, particularly a corporate regulatory framework. And so this imposition about the reporting requirements is meaning that we're going to see that flow down the supply chain. What it means for farmers is that there will be pressures, and certainly small businesses, there'll be pressures to start to think about getting the data now, because those higher up in the supply chain are going to be saying, we need this, because they need to be able to demonstrate their sustainability measures. Of course, we've seen a lot about global sustainability requirements. A lot of the pressure we're seeing is coming from the EU. The EU introduced their Green Deal and the Farm to Fork, but they're getting a lot of pressure from their own farmers. We've heard about the agitation in the Netherlands and in France. I was there in July this year. Interesting feedback I got from the Irish was that, because basically I said to them, I just don't understand why you're looking at, you know, some of the measures you heard Richard talk about, 50% reduction in the livestock herd, 50% reduction in the use of fertilisers. And they said, because we have no choice. We've got to meet the EU legislation. But what they're finding is that EU legislation was not determined based on outcomes. It was based on ideology. And so it's very hard to comply with. So they're starting to actually see some of that fall apart. There will be a change in the EU Parliament next year, and there is a hope that we might start to see some more practical measures come in, and perhaps some pulling back on some of what seem to be very aspirational targets that they're trying to meet. The other thing in Europe that was hard for me to understand until I actually got there was the power of the NGOs. And that's what really drives a lot of the legislation that sits behind this, the Farm to Fork and the Green Deal. And this is, the activists are unbelievable. We think that, you know, it can be quite dramatic here, but when you get over to Europe, they have so much power and they are really well funded. So that is what drives a lot of this ideology, and we've just got to be able to recognise that. We've also got the issue that the EU CAP, so that's their subsidy system, is going to be what they're called environmentally based rather than production based. So they're going to be paid for environmental outcomes. I'm rather cynical about this. I call it greenwashing of subsidies because, once again, it's not based on outcomes. It's actually based on some, idea of, let's say that we are doing this, so they will have green outcomes and we'll continue to get the subsidies. Most countries in the world are actually subsidised when it comes to agriculture, and it's a surprise to those economies when I actually point out that Australian farmers, by and large, are not subsidised. We do not get subsidised. I mean, it's certainly in certain circumstances, such as drought or exceptional circumstances, there may be some assistance. But basically, we're not subsidised. So apart from New Zealand, we operate in what can be described at the best free and open market basis. One of the things I do make sure I point out, both overseas and here, is that there's no one size fits all. And that is why we need to think about outcomes and principles-based approaches, because there has to be a way that says there are different pathways to how we achieve that. How I farm at Yass is quite different to how someone farms here in Wagga, and in different production systems, different environment, and it's quite different in different places of the world. So that's why our regimes have to be able to recognise that. In terms of non-tariff barriers, look, this is where different economies and different countries will start to put up standards, and we certainly see that, once again, coming from the EU in particular, that actually effectively can shut us out of markets. We're seeing a proliferation in the growth of this, and it is a real concern for us. It's a part of the role I have, particularly when I speak at the WTO and OECD, is to push back hard on this and to be able to say why. And the reason it's so important is because when we actually think about Australia, over 50% of the land use here is agriculture. We have a very high amount when it comes to agriculture in terms of water use, and we have a lot of investment there in goods and services and employment. Agriculture is really important to us. Exports are important to us, but we are not entirely export focused. So one of the things I'm really interested about, and I'll be going to COP this year, is to start to say agriculture can't be seen as the problem, we must be part of the solution, but we're only one part of the solution. So don't put all the blame on agriculture. And this is particularly the case when it comes to emissions. There's been a lot of focus on cattle, and I've learned to stop arcing up when people say the solution is to stop eating meat. As a beef producer, it's a bit hard to hear that, but I've learned to say, look, it's about choice, access and equity. There is a place for alternative proteins, but there's also a lot of the world that is not going to be able to have access to those sort of proteins. There will always be a need for meat, fish and other proteins. So we've got to make sure that it is about choice and making sure that we think globally and think about how we help in terms of food security. Look, Richard talked about the Australian Sustainability Framework. I'm not going to go into it other than say I clearly need to update my slides. So Richard, can you send me the racetrack one? This, for me, and for people like Fiona Simpson at the NFF, is our absolute linchpin when we're in overseas markets. Because we can put up one slide and say, this is Australia's framework for sustainability. And we can explain how it meets ESG outcomes. And we can explain how it meets the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that the UN developed. So we are then speaking the language of global markets. We can then explain that beneath that sits individual industry sector sustainability frameworks, such as the beef sustainability framework, the sheep, the dairy. Because we can then say, when it comes to how you implement this, it needs to be fit for purpose. So it is consistent with no one size fits all. So it's actually a really good way that I can articulate what Australia is doing in this space. And it's also a really good way of being able to send a message to our global partners that we are serious about sustainability. This really resonated when I was in Japan late last year, because they only thought that the Europeans were the only ones concerned about sustainability. It's very important to talk about sustainability credentials, but we need to talk about it in context. And for any of you, please do go and have a look at this ABARES report, because what this ABARES report has done is, once again, it said you've actually got to look at the right baseline and be considering diversity. On a whole lot of measures that they do globally, and this is even what's been done by the FAO, Australia looks like it doesn't measure up well at all. But in actual fact, what ABARES have done is they've adjusted the data to be able to take in consideration the diversity, but also to take into consideration subsidies. And when they've recast the data based on that, Australia shows we are doing really well. When it comes to fertiliser use, we actually have done so much work in decades to be able to reduce the amount of fertiliser that we use. We have done so much to reduce the amount of water we use. Why? We're not subsidised. We've got to think about productivity and profitability. You know, when people tell me in overseas markets, Australian farmers use so much pesticides, so much fertiliser, I say, why would we? We're not subsidised. It costs us. Why would I put anything more on my country than I absolutely need to? This report actually shows that. So for me, it's a way of being able to underpin our sustainability credentials, because it actually shows we are actually not just efficient, but we are really sustainable. When I was in Ireland, you know, there were two things that struck me driving across the country. One, I didn't see one dam. And when I asked the question, they said, well, Sue, we don't need dams. It rains all the time here. But two, because it rains so much, they get so much leaching, they need to use enormous amounts of nitrogen fertiliser. So that, for me, and I just said, well, this clearly is why you can't have one rule and one set of standards that fit everyone. It's actually got to be outcomes focused. Traceability is also really important to us. This is what we've actually traded a lot on in terms of our clean and green reputation. And it's really important that we continue to do this. When I was in the US, I was really surprised to see they don't have traceability there. They wanted me to go and talk about our NLIS systems. And for anyone out here in ag tech, if someone can come up with an automatic ear tagger, I'd be really pleased, because I'm getting a bit arthritic now. But traceability is really important in terms of how we can actually demonstrate to consumers and track back from paddock to plate our credentials. Another thing that we have in Australia that's unique is our research and development corporations model. The RDC model is one that I draw on because it not only matches industry levies with government funding, but when I talk to countries who are heavily subsidised, and this was particularly the case in the UK when they went through Brexit, they were looking to pull back on their subsidies, and they said, we're going to find it hard. And I said, well, why don't you redirect that funding into R&D? Because it's not a bad thing to provide support for agriculture, but you've got to think about how you're doing it, and you don't want to have unintended consequences from it. So this is a way that I can say industry has a say in what we do. And it's a model that is considered the envy of the world, and I think it's something that, for me, we can only look to see how we can improve it. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn from others, I think. Ireland, for me, was really interesting because they are doing some great work in sustainability. They're doing some really good measurement work that we can learn from. Most of it's based on emissions, and what I realised, I used to think that we were quite closely aligned to New Zealand, but in actual fact, I think we're more closely aligned to the Latins than we are to New Zealand. New Zealand and Ireland are very similar, very export, dairy, high rainfall intensive. It's the quantification. There is one thing that New Zealand provided a real good lesson on, was around their branding, around Team Island. In New Zealand, they've got something called He Waka Aka Noa, which was once again a partnership between government and industry in terms of measurements and emission, and know your number. And this was something that I questioned when I was there last year and said, the compliance burden is enormous. And I think they're starting to find that they need to find a way that works in practice. So for me, my message to government here was, use a carrot, not a stick. How do we bring farmers with us? And make sure that whatever you put in place can work in practice. Because if it doesn't, you're just not going to get compliance. Canada, the Netherlands, I'll be meeting up with them next week to look at what they're doing in terms of measurement. Now, I don't have a clock going today, so I figure I'm close to time, so I'm just going to finish on Team Australia. If there's one thing we absolutely need to do better, that is collaborate in terms of our outward-facing messages. When we work domestically, it is fine. We have a whole lot of different initiatives. You know, Richard put up that slide where there's a whole lot of different ways of being able to demonstrate and measure sustainability. We've got a whole lot of different organisations. But that makes for a very mixed message in global markets. We need to get consistent, and we need to think about, it's not whether regen ag is better than natural capital or one measure of accounting is better than another. All of these are different ways that farmers can have a choice to be on the pathway to get better sustainability outcomes. And so that's where, for me, we really need to do the work to be able to maximise our opportunities. Thank you. I'll leave it there, and I'll look forward to the panel session.
Thank you, Sue. It's good to know we have people at that tip of the spear when it comes to that overseas markets. Our next case study presenter is co-owner of Sundown Pastoral company, David Statham. Now, I've just got to let you know that 20 years ago, Matty Monk, who's in the room here, brokered me an introduction to Dave. I had a head full of great ideas, and I walked into Dave's office, and he said, look, this is what I'm doing, this is what I need, don't give me ideas, give me solutions. I think I got that verbatim. So this is no nonsense, not responding to market, but leading market. And so it's a privilege to introduce Dave. And of course, along with wife Danielle, is a co-founder of Good Earth Cotton and FibreTrace Technologies. Together, they've created one of the world's more renowned sustainable agricultural enterprises. So get ready, Dave, welcome. Show us how it all works.
It's nice to be invited to a food conference when I grow cotton. So I feel like a bit of a poor cousin. And but if we didn't have cotton, you'd be all naked right now, so it'd make my presentation pretty interesting. And Auntie Cheryl, if you're in the room, make sure those op shops have got cotton in your op shops. But it's great to see education programs out there like the CSU that we're in. And also I've met some people here from the Centre of Excellence in Age with Christine Beasley and her team. I had some very interesting discussions. I didn't know what was happening, but what they're doing at the old Hawkesbury Ag is really good, because one of the biggest issues I see in agriculture is our labour force. It's my biggest concern going forward. So I'm going to address you kids next, the students here in the room. There's three biggest decisions you'll make in your life. You'll spend a third of your time in each of them. One is who you marry. One is what you do, your job. And the third is the bed you lie in. Make sure they got cotton sheets in the bed. But you need to have a sense of purpose in life, and I certainly do. And when people ask me what I do, I said I feed and clothe the world. What do you do? And it feels pretty good. So you need a sense of purpose, and agriculture certainly gives you that. So I hope the next couple of days, today and yesterday, gives you that light switch moment to make a decision in your life, and I hope you choose agriculture. And one thing I want to say is that 80% of the jobs that are by 2030 aren't invented today. It's an incredible statement, but the world's moving so quickly, and a conference like this shows all the technologies and the different pathways going forward. But I just wanted to set some tone on a bit of a story of how what we're doing, and I've got a video and I've got 3 presentations, so I'm going to have to be quick and talk fast. But I want to set a bit of a scene. I grew up in Newcastle, capital of the world, in the steel industry. My father started a steel business, Randbuild, in 1951, and we owned that through to 2004. I was very fortunate, and I learned a lot of lessons, and I'm relating it to it because the lessons that we're taking into what we're doing in agriculture, I learnt from the steel industry. One is my father came into the room on my first day at work, and I left school, And he said to me, son, the three men in the corner, they're your best friends, and they're the salesmen. He said, son, without a sale, you don't need anyone else, including you. And I never forgot it. Marketing first, marketing second, marketing third, and nothing else counts. And I'll never forget that. The second lesson that I learned out of the Randbill business was the importance of technology and software. We had a business that was all manual. We had people processing buildings, and we were very restricted to where we sold those buildings in a radius around Newcastle. We sat down one day and we said, we've got to do something different. We got programmers in. We automated the process of ordering a building. It was a software system. It was supposed to take 9 months. It took 3 years. It was supposed to cost a couple $100,000. It cost a lot more than that. But at the end of the day, the business was 15 times more. And we ended up having to sell it to a monopoly in 2004. But it's another story, and I'll get to that a bit later. But there was a lot of lessons learned in that business that we've taken into agriculture. The road that we took, I married, I mentioned that first decision. I think I did a pretty good job of that, because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about was the passion of my wife. She left school in year 10, she studied fashion, and all she had, she raised 4 children, and at one point in her life she said to me, I'll never forget it, she said to me, one day I'm going to go out into that paddock and I'm going to wear the clothes that I grow. And she didn't stop until she found it. So I've got some presentations, and that was called FibreTrace, a traceability technology, which we found. She rang up the International Cotton Association in London, and she said, surely you guys are doing something to do with traceability. Matter of fact, we are. American $100 bill and euro currency, not the euro currency, but the FibreTrace technology is the same technology that's in the euro today, and an American $100 bill is cotton. So they've done a heap of research back in 16 and 17. They did some trial work, and we met the inventor, paper security guy, Paul Stenning, and we went over to Germany. We saw what he was doing. We bought the technology. We've patented it in America and the European Union. And it's embedded into the fibre. It's a rare earth mineral that's embedded into the fibre, and it's extruded inside a viscose fibre that replicates cotton, and we put it in at the gin, and it's permanently in your garment for life. Then we've built a blockchain technology around that, and you can follow it all the way through the supply chain. So it's full traceability, full transparency, and it's a consumer-driven back technology. I'm going to get to... And so we had 2 passions to do what we did. My biggest one was to tell positive stories about agriculture, and more importantly, positive stories about cotton. The cotton industry in Australia is one of the most successful industries in this country, bar none. We are the most efficient cotton growers in the world, and there's daylight second. Our research and development people have done a wonderful job in our genetic traits. The GMO is one of the best stories in fibre there is in the world. We're using about 95% less pesticides, and you know our yields are absolutely world-leading yields. The other thing, so I had a passion to tell positive stories. My wife had a passion to actually wear the clothes that she grew, and I also had a passion not to be dictated to by the supply chain. And I was in the cattle industry. I'm not as gutsy and ballsy as Josie and the next panellist you're about to see. It's one of the great Australian stories you'll ever hear, to build your own abattoir. That is a remarkable story, and I take my hat off to you both. But I didn't have the balls to continue to do that, so I chose the cotton industry, where I could control my marketing. I could go down further stream. I can store the product. I can forward sell it 3 years. And it's a wonderful industry to be in. So I'm going to get to play this video, and then I've got some presentations on Good Earth Cotton, of how we've branded our cotton and how we came to do that and the reasons behind it, and the traceability technology FibreTrace. And the most exciting one is the future generation of green technologies in energy. So I'll go to the video.
The Earth needs us to turn back the clock on emissions. cotton is raising the game from the ground up. Good Earth cotton relies on decades of data to farm smart. Less tilling, precision planting, a light touch that empowers healthy soil to soak up carbon. Smart farms rely on innovation. Smart farmers rely on data to benchmark more crop per drop. Satellite data is used in conjunction with precision agriculture. Biodiversity that's carbon soaking with a social conscience. Good Earth cotton grows more, uses less, reaps the sun and has flicked the switch. Carbon is cancelled. Customers want a clear conscience. Fashion needs to tell the whole story. Transparency needs Good Earth cotton, traced and delivered, seed to shelf, through to reuse and recycle. We promise the Earth because we deliver. Carbon positive, traceable, audited. The Earth needs Good Earth cotton.
It's a bit of a brand video that we've done for Good Earth Cotton. How all this journey started is that I had 20 years of data. And I go back to the Randbill. It was back PAM. We used a paddock management system called PAM, which is now Ag Commander. And we had 20 years of soil records. I think Matthew's still in the room on the cattle side and on the cotton side. Data was everything to us because I came from the Randbill background. 20 years of data of every single pass, every single fertiliser, chemical use on every single field. And then we had 20 years of soil tests every field, every second year, geolocated 0 to 30 centimetres. Just so happened, that's the same protocol as the GHG protocol for soil mapping, soil tests. We did this, tillage practices have changed so much in farming in the last 20 years, it's incredible. We'd had 12 to 13 tillage passes in 1 year, and we're now down to about 2 or 3. And only one of those passes is a tillage. So we actually fell into this whole system backwards because I had a Professor Francois Visser came down to our farm in 2017-18, carbon friendly, and he said, what have you done differently from 2013 to 2018? You've doubled your soil carbon. That's when we knew we had something, and we marketed it. And my wife branded it Good Earth Cotton, and that's what you saw on the video. Earth's only climate positive, so we've gone into, so what we've done, we've now combined Francois' methodology, which is an ISO standard of carbon accounting, with the downforce technology. And I was so happy to see Jackie McLeod, an incredible woman. I don't think I've met too many people in the world that have live a life like you, Jackie, and is intelligent and so passionate about what you do. That downforce technology in combination with Francois is the way in which Good Earth Cotton is going forward. The brands around the world are looking for regenerative and something different because the cotton industry with the organics around the world has been called out and found wanting for all the greenwashing that's actually been done around the world. So there's a massive opportunity to come to the table on a marketing from all these brands around the world that sunk all this money into organic cotton, and it's all been found out for what it is. And 10 times more cotton sold as organic than grown. It was just, and they've been caught out and found out. So Good Earth Cotton is filling that gap. We are getting premiums, so we're getting premiums, and it's without selling the carbon, but it's about branding, and we're on the road to insetting with these brands our carbon, not the ACCU system. So Good Earth Cotton, the principles: reduce tillage is the main functionality, improving livelihoods, and it's got to be traced. It's the combination of having a carbon positive story as well as the ability to trace is when we started to get people to pay. It took 5 years. I was speaking to the wrong people. I spoke to the mills. Big mistake. No, there's no way a mill is going to give away any margin to me or anyone else. It's the brands that have got the problem. The brands have got the responsibility, as we've heard from and the EU is driving it. The EU by 2025 has to have on every garment that you're wearing, has to have traceability back to origin, and they've got to have a CO2 score on the shirt. Otherwise, if they don't, they pay a garment tax. That's the opportunity for farmers, for cotton farmers. If you can tell that story, where 50 to 60% of the life cycle of this shirt starts with me, starts with the farmer. That's why they're going to come to us. And these brands are now not going through merchants. It's the second longest traded commodity in the world. Second longest. And it's been driven by conglomerates, traders. Those traders have got a big problem coming because the farmers have got the answer to the Europeans' problem. They either pay the tax or they pay a farmer a premium. And I'm going to find the people that value what we do and pay a premium. And I'm going to tell them what they're going to pay, and they're not going to tell me. So I'm pretty passionate about that. I had to get out of the cattle industry because of that reason. Obviously, high yielding resources, renewable energy, we're measuring all these things. It's all independently verified and importantly by FibreTrace. These are assessment informations. This is basic general information about the farm that we've got to give Francois and the emissions and the soil carbon. I'll be using the downforce technology. It's one of the best technologies I think I've ever seen. It's so easy to use, and the visualization and the marketability, when I set a brand in front of that technology, blows them out of the water. It's game over after they see it, because you can see it's a 63,000 acre property and it's all on one screen, and you can go bang, bang, bang 5 years at a time, and it's really, really impressive. So you guys have seen all that. I'm going to have to go pretty quickly, but Francois issues a certificate. He's got the soil sequestration numbers. He's got the emission numbers that we provide him. He issues a certificate. Now, he's third-party verified. He's got an ISO standard, and he's also been verified by SGS, and that's the certificate. To give you an idea of Good Earth cotton and the numbers compared to the world average, it's fairly significant, obviously very important to brands. It's not just about carbon. You can see down here you've got your carbon emissions and your carbon credits, and the importance of the different inputs. I'm just going to go pretty quickly through them. The Regen Agri, I won't say too much about this because it's a very generic. What we're doing is very site-specific. It's on-farm data. The power of that is incredible when you get to a brand. We've got to do this because you've got someone in the buying department that needs a certificate, and I won't go too much further into that. It's just too generic and it's not specific to a farm. But we still did it anyway. And this is just some of the other total sequestration since we've been going and the reporting that we're doing. I'm going to keep going because I've got a few slides to go through. Is there a next one? Not working somehow. Oh, here we go. B Corp. Everything that on that big racetrack that you saw, that took 2 years. That's the highest corporate governance you can ever do. It's an American standard. We did it. It was unbelievable. Everything on that racetrack was included in that B Corp. We're the first cotton farm in Australia to be B Corp certified. Once again, sitting down with brands, marketing yourself, marketing your story. It means a massive. It was a big job, but it was very worthwhile doing. I'll skip through this. Sharing is essential. The brands don't want it just to be about us. So we're engaged, and that's why the downforce technology is so important. We need to go to other countries. We're thinking going to Kenya. We're going to the United States and potentially Brazil to get other people to do the same thing, to start measuring and see if they can get a result of sequestering more than they emit. GEC, market, let's go to the brand so they've got a supply chain. FibreTrace. Every fibre tells a story. This is a technology. Gives you 20/20 vision right through the supply chain. There's two products. It's obviously a digital technology. The critical thing is, and this is what my wife says all the time, it's got to be live and it's got to be physical and the digital together. So at the end of the day, you get an actual map of who's touched it, when they touched it, and the carbon footprint of the people that have touched it, so you get a full score of the garment at the end of the day. Client success, we've had reformation. I want you to tell a quick story. I've got 2 minutes left, but I've got to keep going because I've got the best to last. We went into a shop in New York 3 or 4 years after we started. Reformation, young girl from LA, she started with all the offcuts of every other brand. She sold a business for $100 million US, and she was our first customer. And we went into a store in New York and saw our brand there. You got no idea of what that meant to us. I'm almost in tears now thinking about it. The passion that you had as a grower to wear the own clothes that you got and know it's yours on the other side of the world was unbelievable feeling. Incredible. I want to get to I'm going to flick through this really quickly. It's a luminescent pigment I've described. That scanner, it picks up a signal. That signal is like a light wave, and it excites the rare earth mineral, and it sends, that you got 5 lights on that scanner, and if it's been blended, it'll go to 3 lights, 2 lights, and 1 light. So we know that the people who've touched it have diluted it. So we've got them. That's exactly the scanner there. It's pretty cool. I bought 100. We did a big campaign with Country Road. Bought 100 T-shirts, gave it to all the staff. They came up and I scanned them all. And that's yours that you grew. So that was pretty cool. And there you go. That's a consumer-facing technology where the person buying the garment can see who touched it and what the score is of the garment. So it's pretty cool. I'm going to go flick through all this. I'm out of time, but I want to get to this. I'm clicking. I want to get to this. This is really exciting. David, I can solve the fertiliser problem. I was fortunate enough to meet a company from New Zealand, Heringa Energy, who are in the renewable energy space. I've built a solar farm at Wathagar Cotton Gin with battery technology, and we're now 66% of the cotton gin is on renewable energy. Stage 2, we've won a massive big grant to build a hydrogen and ammonia plant on the site. 2 more solar farms, so make it 27 megawatts, into an electrolyser in the middle there. Then we're going to it splits into water. So it's electrical rod with electricity into water. The H, the 2 and the O get split. We store the hydrogen. The hydrogen will displace diesel. And then you pluck nitrogen out of the air, you add it to the hydrogen to create anhydrous ammonia. And anhydrous ammonia will be my key. 85% of my emissions is in 2 products, fuel and fertiliser. And I'm going to create it myself, and it'll be all green. So it adds to the story. My cotton price won't be the same after I do this. It'll be even higher. Because that's the solar farm there. It's a German technology. It's a PEG system. Grid connected. It's a lot of fun being in the power business, and I don't like getting dictated to by a power company either. So I'm telling them what to do and I'm selling them power. That feels pretty good. That's an electrolyser. That's a bit of an idea. That's what they're doing in New Zealand. They're doing it with wind. I'm doing it with solar. So that'll give you an idea of, it's not a big footprint, 18 hectares for a 27 megawatt solar farm and a hydrogen and ammonia plant. So it's not a big footprint, and it fits all inside the cotton gin. And it'll power the cotton gin 100%, no emissions on cotton ginning, no emissions, almost 0 emissions on the farm. The only emissions left I'll have on the farm, which I need you to solve, is that I need to have the emissions of any chemical or insecticide. The creation of any insecticide or herbicide is the only emissions I'll have left. So I'd love the tech people out there to solve that one. Obviously, we're using urea at the moment. We'll now be using anhydrous ammonia, and that's how it's used. One more, that's the site there. The first 2 boxes you see there is what's already been built. The second 2 boxes will be the second phase, and that's the footprint of the ammonia and the hydrogen plant in the corner there. Last but not least, this is a pretty cool technology. The Wagner family and Darrell Hammond, who I use for my fertiliser, that'll be going at the back of the gin, and that'll take all the cotton trash and convert it, 0 emissions, and convert it into biochar. Biochar goes back into the cotton fields. Storytelling, marketing 1, marketing 2, marketing 3, nothing else counts. Going back to the Rambill days. That's about the end of the presentation, and I'm spot on time. Thank you, David.
Look, and what a great start to the panel session. So look, I'd like to introduce up the panel team, please. We've got Jane Lovell. Welcome back, Jane. Great to meet you, Director of Freshcare. Peter Carter, the inimitable Peter, General Manager of Public Policy and Government Engagement for GS1 Australia. Sue, welcome back, please. Thank you. You've got a great foundation from your previous presentation, a special representative of DAF. Josie, Angus, welcome. Come aboard. Director of Angus Pastoral Company, as you heard Dave alluded to, a really impressive story. And of course, Nick Pagett, the Executive Director of Charles Sturt University's AgriPark, who will be the moderator. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Dave. And wow, that's going to be a bloody hard act to follow. So look, thank you very much, and to our panel, welcome. It's I know we're a little tight on time, and we are the panel before lunch. It's always a tough gig, so no pressure. But it's really great to have, thank you to Sue particularly, and obviously David, a really inspiring speech. A reminder that we have Slido, so please get in there and get your questions. I've got them on the screen, and the more thumbs up that you give me, the higher the priority, so please get those questions out there because it's really great. We're going to start, like we have done on all of our panels, with an intent statement and an introduction from each of our panel members. Quite a diverse panel today, so it's really great. And I'll probably head across to Jane on the far end to lead off.
Thank you. We are going to show a little video about Freshcare in a second, because I'm not going to assume that all of you know Freshcare the way I know Freshcare, even though it's been around for over 20 years. So that'll give you an insight into what Freshcare is about. But me and why I'm here, I guess I love the title Eyes on Export. And I think when I reflect on my career, that's where it really started, as an onion exporter. And so that journey took me into food safety and quality assurance. So that's sort of why I'm sitting here. Is this where I get to say what the vision for 10 years would be? Yeah,
yes, please.
So look, I think everything that's been said this morning so far kind of feeds into what I would like to see. What I hear from primary producers and have since we started down this journey is, can we please have one system? Can we please just let me do it once and not have multiple iterations? So I love the idea of having Freshcare developing those goals, and making sure that things aren't too crazy and prescriptive from a European point of view. I'll give you an analogy. When we put in field to fork Nature's Choice back in 2000 with Tasmanian onion growers, we basically had to have hedgerows, badgers and hedgehogs, because that's what the standard said. Now that might sound pretty crazy, so our job was to interpret what that meant for Australia. So hedgerows became bush, hedgehogs were echidnas, and badgers were wombats. So it's a flippant example, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is we can have these standards, but we have to make sure that they're practical and they work in the Australian context. So we might roll the video on Freshcare. I've had more than a minute.
More and more consumers are wanting to know how their fruit is grown and why it's grown.
Freshcare helps Australian growers give consumers confidence in their produce.
So Freshcare is a really good tool that growers can use to tell a story to the consumer around why we farm the way that we do and how we grow our food. And our standards underpin that.
Freshcare's main purpose in the horticultural industry is to provide a set of standards that enables our growers to demonstrate their commitment to best practice and to provide the safest, sustainable product in the global market.
With more than 20 years of industry data and experience, Freshcare offers the longest-running national certification program and access to domestic and international markets. We also provide food safety and quality assurance, as well as government advocacy and the management and maintenance of certification standards.
Freshcare is Australian born. We've been supporting growers since the very beginning of the concept of quality assurance in Australia. Everything that we do is for our growers.
Freshcare advocates for growers and businesses to industry. We provide accessible e-learning and training resources and we enable diversification of income streams. Freshcare has on-the-ground knowledge and domestic-based customer service. Freshcare's initiatives and programs are making a difference, now and into the future.
We're growing food for the health and well-being of our nation.
Thanks, Jane. Fantastic response. Peter.
Well, thanks, Nick. I'll start with a vision. I see a future building on Sue's message where our projection of the Australian export and brand promise is really clear, it's really simple, it's really unified, and it's understood by primary producers as well as processors and exporters and brokers and government officials. And we're a fair way from that at the moment. My name's Peter Carter. I'm from Gungungara country, Crookwell, basalt soil. I try to get there occasionally to help out on the farm. Agricultural economist. I work with GS1 Australia. They're the barcode people, so when we think about traceability and things moving through the supply chain, that's the place that we play. My message today, beyond a simple, clear, evidence-based value proposition that we can all be proud of, that projects a very positive story about the way we look after the environment and the future for our children, is underpinned by a principle that we've got to get the basics right. I get really excited when I hear David. I think David Lamb does a great job, and congratulations on simple messages people can understand. You know, his comment the other day in the context of telecommunication challenges, I think he was letting Warren get off easy, but he said, you know, Australia's big and it's bumpy. I will always think about David as bumpy from now on, but we've got to speak a language people can understand, and credit to this conference for bringing that community together. We are talking to the converted. I think Sue will probably call that out. We need to be projecting our message to the people that really care about it. We love it. We love these sorts of forums, but it's not actually the right community.
Sue, can I hand across?
Thank you. Well, I don't need to talk about who I am and what I do, so I'll go straight to the vision, and I think it was articulated so clearly with David. I would like the rest of the world to be looking at all of Australians' agricultural product and services as us being able to be in a position where we're price makers, not price takers. So it's because we're recognised as being the best in the world, and everyone is going to demand it. There's a lot of work to do to get there, and certainly, you know, Peter and I have had a number of conversations, particularly since he's been doing his trip overseas on his this scholarship. But it really has been around what is the work we need to do around traceability, getting the messaging out, getting that right messaging out. And I do say we tend to speak to the converted. So I'm here speaking at a conference in a room of believers. We have actually got to get the message across to the people who don't even know we exist, who still think that what they eat does come from a lab or does come just from the supermarket, and don't think, what goes into it behind that. So we really need to be thinking about how agriculture is mainstream, not special. And there's a lot of work we need to do, and the key for me still is collaboration. We need to work together with our farmers, our governments, our research organisations, our policy institutes, our RDCs, and every other player there, and give a simple, clear message. And I think I don't want to be political, but if there's one thing we can learn from what's happening this week, if you don't get a clear, concise message, you completely lose where you want to get. And I want to make sure that we can actually get there with agriculture.
Great, thanks, Sue. And Josie.
I think, we've talked a lot in the last couple of days about these increasingly consolidated and somewhat fragile supply chains, the demands of their activist shareholders, and how, as farmers, we need to be providing some of the answers and solutions, for these supply chains. And as a producer and a branded producer with direct clients in 30 countries, our focus is clearly on on the consumer. Export is vital to us as producers, and you know, there's no better evidence of that right now than, you know, the sheep and the cattle price, you know, plummeting here, but the same supply chains and the same players in the US, and we're seeing rapidly rising, you know, cattle and sheep prices. So, you know, for us, it's about how does ag tech, you know, support potentially smaller and agile supply chains that are direct to consumer. And the other key part for me is getting government messaging about Australia right. You know, David said it very loudly and proudly. In so many instances, there is Australia and then a country mile. We've been pretty poor at being able to, you know, we talk up our traceability and our NLAS, and then we talk about the EU demands and standards, and Australia just gifted 35,000 tonnes of our beef export access to the EU, to the America, with zero traceability. So how do we actually get market access and the benefits from this and drive it?
Fantastic. Great responses and great introductions to the audience, so it's really great. We're going to jump into a couple of audience questions, and by far this has had a huge amount of thumbs up, and I'm going to sort of pose the question, and probably Sue maybe get you to lead off, but really ask the panel to jump in as we go along. But I'm also going to sort of try and reframe it a little. So the question is, why is Australia developing its own sustainability framework, which is not recognised anywhere in the world? Doesn't it simply add to the confusion? And the flip is, what do we need to do to ensure that it's actually aligned to the global operating frameworks?
Well, I do think that AASF is aligned to global frameworks, particularly because it's aligned to the SDGs, which is the language that we see in overseas markets. We actually I don't see sustainability frameworks developed overseas, not even in Europe. So what I do see in Europe is a lot of talk about what they're doing, and then no clear demonstration of something tangible that they're putting in place. We've got a lot of justification and a lot of substantiation of what we are doing here. We just have not articulated well in one place. And as I said, that sustainability framework is something that articulates this in the Australian context, but because it aligns to the SDGs and because it aligns with ESG, that is the global language we're talking when it comes to sustainability. My concern about us trying to develop standards at this stage is we've still got standards being developed, and there will be international standards, and what we're trying to do internationally is be able to influence those international standards so they are not Eurocentric, because that's where the biggest challenge is going to come from. And we've got to make sure that they are principles-based and outcomes-based so that you can have different pathways and different acceptable ways of actually achieving that. So that's where a lot of the work's being done at the moment.
Great, fantastic. Did you want to add in, Peter?
Yeah, I just build on that. There is a lot of noise. Eco-labels in Europe, there's over 450 of them now. It's been well published that 60 to 70% of those schemes are essentially greenwashing. That's been verified in Australia through our own investigations. So the issue here is, whilst we've all been focused on, say, traceability of physical product through the supply chain, and that's important, is the real focus now is the traceability and the transparency of the credentials that relate to those products. And Australia is leading some global work in that area. The conversations we're having about verifiable credentials are really critical. So how can we wrap our value proposition in cryptographically secure layers of trust that we've all been using in internet banking for over 10 years. It's not new technology to verify that these certificates are real. And I'd say more than half of us are actually in our wallets at the moment, in our mobile phones. We've already got digital wallets. So we shouldn't be fearful, and we've got the tools. We just simply need to probably have more focus, less excitement, and get on with the job of delivering and wrapping our brand promise in strong trust, I think.
And Josie, as a large vertically integrated enterprise, how does that impact on you?
I think the question was really good, and it is important to us that we speak a global language. Australia has a different definition on deforestation than any other, than Europe, than the FAO, than the US. That has massive impact on our beef industry, and will continue to do so until we start to talk a global language.
Yeah,
Jane.
so I guess a lot of lived experience in this space, which is why I'm a big fan of, can we just clearly define the goalposts? Because if you show me the goalposts, I can actually have a shot at kicking the goal. So I do agree that there is a risk in us creating our own framework if it doesn't have reference to our major export markets. But I believe that's been taken into account. So a framework is great. Diversity for people to have different approaches to be able to achieve that framework, I also agree with, but I also, I've got scars from the comments from farmers from 20 years ago saying, please, just one. And once you get the proliferation starting, you can lose impetus to start, and we mustn't have that. We mustn't make it so complicated to choose the right horse that nobody gets on board. So I'm a fan of a clear direction that is linked to our key markets.
I might just make one comment there, and that is one of the things that I think we do need to avoid, the way governments tend to set one rule is by black letter law regulation. So my caution would be, let's not push towards regulation before we know what we want to be regulated. So I think that's where we're at the moment, doing the work to say there's a lot of different options and choices. Which are the ones that are going to work, and how do we build that under the framework so we know what in the future a regulatory framework could sit around.
And I would just, sorry to just take over, I would just add that agree, and I guess to make it clear that my experience is in that commercial realm. So it's the multiple UK retailers all coming up with different versions of pretty much the same thing and saying, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. It's just, it's an enthusiasm killer, and it just saps energy and money. So I can't be a fan of that.
And that's a great intro into the next question, because I think we were probably all experiencing, but it really brings it to life as David flicked through the screen of all the different certificates that he's got sitting behind his enterprise. And so the question is, kudos to David for seeing the opportunities rather than those as being obstacles within his industry. But I suppose the question to the panel is, how do you go about creating a national mindset of opportunity rather than waiting for regulation or attacking the processes that are sitting in behind it? Because that's really, I think, the nugget of gold that came out of the last presentation is, how do you create value from ESG? How do you create value from the quality of our clean, green produce and food? So I'm going to open that to anyone who wants to jump in across the panel.
I'm happy to kick it off, actually, because credentials exchange has been a topic that's close to my heart, and there is a global, well-organised infrastructure for managing standards around quality and safety. ESG is not a new economic theory. Sorry, consultants. There's a lot of money coming your way, but let's not treat it as a new type of economics. It's just a claim. It's just another credential. We've been doing this well for many years, and it's really well established. It's actually the backbone of our mutual trade recognition agreements. So less hype, more focus on delivery. I think the answer to the question is, for the last 5 to 10 years, we've all been really excited about monetisation of data, and that's important and that's good. People often ask, where does that certificate really need to sit? Where does that information go? Who gets to see it? Should it be on a blockchain? Blah, blah, blah. It should be sitting in the balance sheet. I bet you those certificates aren't identified in David's balance sheet at the moment. When, maybe the carbon ones are, when they start becoming assets in his business, then all of a sudden they're valuable. And I'm getting a really strong message from David that that's exactly where he's going. He's going to turn that into high prices and premiums. So we're having these sort of long-winded debates about data and who gets to see what. Other parts of the world, they're not doing that. They're looking for green ticks. Well-established, credentialed organisations that will qualify a claim and give something a green tick. It's not about loading blockchain or any other database up with your data. I think we've sort of lived through that. It's about having confidence and trust in the credentials that are issued by those accredited organisations. We call them trust anchors, and many of you are in the room today.
Great. And Josie, how have you gone about doing this within your business, creating an opportunity mindset?
I guess, you know, we started branding our own beef 24 years ago. We've had a focus on customers and direct customers. You know, we've had individual restaurants on the other side of the world air freight 2 boxes in the bottom of an air freight container to get it, you know, to their restaurant. And the single most powerful thing that we can ever do is not a certificate. Generally, it's actually bring somebody to farm. Unfortunately, that's not, you know, an option for every single transaction, but connectivity between producers and end customers is what builds trust, and it is what builds, and so it is facilitating that, making sure that producers have access directly to, you know, processing and markets and things like that, and making sure that we can actually have these flourishing supply chains that are strong. I think COVID proved to us the fragility of over-consolidation of supply chains. So how do we develop the ecosystem to let branded produce and those connections flourish?
Yeah.
And Sue?
So I'd go back to what I said earlier about a carrot rather than a stick approach. I don't want to see taxes brought in just to make people try and comply. So I think it comes down to the value proposition, and those businesses that are seeing value, which Josie, you are, David clearly is, that value proposition will be reflected in the price. There will be early leaders, and they need to be rewarded for being early leaders, but we also need to be able to provide incentives to bring the rest of the people with us so that they can see there is value in doing this, because in the absence of this costs them both in dollars and in time. And unless they can see that it's worthwhile doing it, then they're going to be pulled kicking and screaming when it ends up becoming compulsory. So we must find a way of bringing them with us early.
Fantastic. Jane?
Yeah, so the kicking and screaming, I guess, the early days of on-farm food safety and quality assurance, it was rooms full of farmers kicking and screaming who had to do it to get into supermarkets, and I actually don't ever want to have to stand in front of that mob again. But I really want to just resonate, the whole trust piece really resonates for me. So one of the things that I think the value proposition, it's hard to develop trust with people you don't know and across distance. So Nick, I can't shake your hand from here, but that's the way business used to be done. So I see food safety, quality assurance, environmental assurance systems as ways of actually solidifying that handshake. And what we are seeing and have seen for a long time, although maybe it's reversing a bit through COVID, is the distance between farming and city and the lack of understanding. And through that lack of understanding, that can have some really quite negative and probably unintended consequences. So I think that these assurance systems actually give us an opportunity to develop trust, to have that handshake, and to tell a verified story, not a fairy story. So it's not, you know, we've been trading off, others are trading off clean green credentials that maybe aren't true. That's where, sad as it is, having an audit and having that certified story actually gives you a more trustworthy story to be able to tell.
Great, thank you. So another question from the audience is, will international buyers demand proof of ESG credentials in specific formats or standards, or will producers have the flexibility on how they prove compliance? So who wants to grab that one?
I think that's still up for debate. That's what we're working on. I think you see from different parts of the world, there is a push to come up with a standard, a credential. Australia is very vocal in pushing back on this and saying that we are promoting a principles-based approach. Australia's developed a set of principles that we are socialising with other like-minded countries, that we are then taking to the WTO, the FAO, OECD and others to say, this is the way that we believe is a better way of doing this, rather than coming up with one very prescriptive standard that we think everyone can actually comply with. If we actually have goals that are articulated in the standard, but the pathways to get there are fit for purpose, then that is what we are more inclined to be seeking, rather than prescription all the way down.
And Josie, how do you think your business will address that issue?
I think once again it comes to the, are we headed, you know, in a single march on consolidation, or are we, you know, looking at branded pathways at divergent supply chains? And I think it's a better outcome for producers and it's a better outcome for consumers if we can make sure that we've got a good mix. We'll always need, you know, some of the behemoths, but making sure that we keep, from a regulatory framework, from a, you know, from a tech focus, keep drawing a lens back to, you know, how do we allow divergent supply chains to flourish?
Fantastic.
Nick, I might add that when I last checked, there were about 190 digital product passport initiatives underway in Europe, so we monitor that quite closely. And you know what? There won't be such thing as one digital product passport for Europe. What there will be, however, is there will be a mechanism for linking credentials and claims that relate to a product. Like that will be standardised. Now, whether it's a barcode or a QR code or some other mechanism, there won't be one product passport. There will be a number of claims that will be officially recognised, and it will be most likely organisations like Freshcare, the accredited national bodies who have the strong scientific ability to instantiate those claims. But I think sometimes we oversimplify things with metaphors in our narrative, but all we're seeing in the future is products where claims can be associated unambiguously in ways that are persistent as well. So it could be a claim around ethical labour sourcing, it could be environmental stewardship, or any other of the regulations that our trade partners might impose in the future. But it is really important we have that mechanism to link that credential to the thing that it relates to. And at the moment, we actually don't. So we've actually got a little bit of work to get a foundational capabilities established that will allow things like data science and AI to be really effective. But if we don't have a consistent, effective, say, way of doing property identification in Australia, if we don't tackle the PIC issue, then $20 million to fix the NLIS system, or $38 million we heard New South Wales putting into ear tags for sheep and goats. If we don't address the fundamental requirements for traceability, I need to know the location, I need to know the parties, I need to know the product. If we can't get that right as a national organisation, we won't be able to associate our claims and credentials to the thing that we want to buy and sell. So we've got a little bit of work to do in that area still.
Great. And I'm very conscious we're close to time. I'm just going to ask one final question, and I love to add to that question around what's your call to action. So what I really want to know, just very quickly, what's the most important thing that you can ask the audience or tell the audience that you believe needs to change to enable us to grow our export within the Australian industry? And what's the call to action for the audience to go out and propagate within their communities? So Jane, will work back across from the...
Oh, really?
I didn't give you any time for this one.
That's a tough question. Look, I think it's an appreciation of the need for Australia, as Sue has said, to be able to have that united story. I think that's really critical. We fight amongst commodities and we fight amongst states, and we end up doing ourselves a disservice in the market. So I think we need to be unified. I'm all about unity, and I would love to have clear goalposts so that our farmers know, where they need to be heading.
One message, one voice.
One message, one voice.
Beautiful. Peter.
You might like this one, everyone. Get on a plane. We can travel again now. Get on a plane and go and interview some of the people who are sitting in the markets where these new rules are being defined. Saturate yourself in the culture and understand their genuine concern about 2 really, really hot Northern Hemisphere summers. This is not just a thing for us to navigate and to do a better job of marketing ourselves around. And I'd say speak the language and learn the language that our trading partners are speaking. That does come to data standards and the use of information systems, etc. But we need to learn about that rather than try and invent our own. We're a price taker, but we're also a standards taker. We'd like to think that we can reshape the way world markets work, but we're small and we need to work within that constraint.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Sue.
I think you've all heard some great examples and stories over the last couple of days, and you would all have great examples yourself. Use digital technology to get that message out globally so we can really demonstrate mainstream how good we're doing, and then be honest about what more work we're doing and what we're actually doing about it. And I think that way we will start to really spread the message that really comes back to what Australian agriculture is doing.
And Josie.
I think we've got to keep focusing on the practical as well. I think, we talk about some of these wonderful traceability mechanisms, but the reality is, for a product like beef, we still have to fly a health certificate across the other side of the globe. It doesn't speak a lot for sustainability. So we actually do have to think about how do we get some of the basics right that can make a real difference. Likewise, we can miraculously get someone in Perth to drive 5 bulldozers in the Pilbara, but we fly vets around the country to spend 5 minutes inspecting a mob of cattle before they're slaughtered. We really do have to think, and keep focusing not only on some of the, the really flash stuff, but we've got to get the basics happening as well.
Great.
And so the great thing about a call to action is there's 200 people plus in this room today. So pick one of those messages, get online, social post to your networks, and it will amplify. 200 amplified to your 500 people networks will amplify again. Get the message out there. That's our call to action. And it's really important that we really drive those messages to the broader community, because I think it was raised earlier, we're preaching to the converted in the room. It's the ones outside of the room that we've really got to educate. So I want to thank our panel. It's been a fantastic conversation. Very conscious that we're between lunch, sitting between the audience and lunch. I think, Dave, we hand back to you.
Yeah.